Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. From the City of Angels in Los Angeles, and normally from the Big Apple in New York City, but my guest host, Adrienne Gruberg, is missing in action. I think she's been going through a move, and, moves are very unpredictable. Anyway, welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I am Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver, coming to you live at CaregiverDave.com, along with my lovely co-host, typically, but not today. Also coming to you live and on demand 24/7 on numerous syndicated radio and podcast networks on 26 global audio video platforms, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Vimeo, Stitcher Radio, Blog Talk Radio. Oh, and too many more to mention. In fact, we're proud to be voted #1 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM and #2 caregiver podcast on FeedSpot, as well as #2 on caringvillage.com. And we have an especially exciting show planned for you today. William Peters, MFT, is the founder of the Shared Crossing Project, whose mission is to positively transform relationships to death and dying through education and raising awareness about shared crossings and their healing benefits. And a lot of you may not know what a shared crossing is, but we'll find that out. But before we get started, I want to thank my last week's guest, the plus side of older dogs, how an older dog is a win-win situation. And we thank Marian Zola, who has written an amazing book about how you should always adopt rescue animals and not buy them from breeders. And just a reminder, you can listen or watch that show and all our shows, including this one here, on our membership website, caregiverdave.com, or any of our other 26 global audio video net platforms that I mentioned earlier. All right, enough of that. Welcome, William. Welcome to the Caregiver Dave Show. I must make sure and enunciate all of my words. We're so excited to have you on.
Thank you, Dave. Good to be here.
And I always like to ask my guests, if you've been listening to the show, you know what that question is, right?
I remember. You got to remind me one more time.
Who is William Peters, and why was he placed on this earth?
Yeah, so that is a question that I could probably take a few days to answer, but I'll boil it down to this. I had a near-death experience when I was 17 years old.
Really?
And it was a high-speed skiing accident.
Oh my gosh.
And in that experience, I was catapulted out of my body upon contact, with the snow at high speed. And as I was going away from my body in a very beautiful realm of existence, seeing my life pass before me, came into this tunnel, and it was beautiful, awe-inspiring. And I saw the light, and I saw that light. I mean, it's just a classic near-death experience, as you know. But I had this response, which is totally uncharacteristic. And that is, I don't want to die. And I said, God, don't let me die. Most near-death experiencers will say, oh, this is great. I'm good. This is like the best I've ever felt. My response was, God, I need to go back. I did not achieve or accomplish what I came into this life to do. And with that, after some time hanging out in the light and feeling great, I felt this pushback on my body, and the telepathic communication, make something of your life. Well, that question, or that kind of command, stayed with me for, I think, mostly unconsciously, driving me like, is my life meaningful? I've been given a second chance. What does this mean? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until about 13 years ago, after a lot of experiences with more death and dying, worked in Zen Hospice and Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco, worked in 2 war zones with a lot of refugees and starvation and famine in Peru and Guatemala in the 80s. So a lot of experience with adversity and pain and suffering, that Raymond Moody is talking about this experience where somebody dies and a caregiver or loved one says that they feel like they shared in the transition with the dying into a benevolent afterlife. So
I've never heard of that before. I've heard of the near-death experiences. You're the first person who has explained this, or I've listened to it, where they're saying someone else shares it, and you're calling that shared death experience.
Yes.
So why don't you explain what that is? Because since they already have a name for it, SDE.
Yes. Yeah. So it's, imagine being at the bedside, or you can be remote, but somebody's dying.
So you're on the ski slope and somebody is home 100 miles away and they're having an experience with you.
Exactly. Except my example doesn't work really well because I didn't die. You kind of have to, if I had died in that experience and my mother was sitting, in, her home and saying, oh my God, I feel like I'm with William, seeing his life reviewed, going into the light, seeing his conversation with God, if you will, then she would have had a shared death experience with me.
You know what? Now that you mention that, I'm reminded, not only on television and in movies, but in real life experiences where someone is dying remotely and that loved one knows it. It's, oh my God, I got to pray for Peter or whoever, or let me get on the phone,
Yeah.
Is that what's going on?
That is a remote SDE, and that would be a particular type where you have what we call a sympathetic or sensory experience that lets you know that someone you care about is dying. And those are common. And the problem is we don't really talk about them in our culture very much. And so when you say, I didn't really, you're a caregiver, you help people and have so many people that you are in contact with around death and dying, and yet you haven't heard about it as much. And, this is what we found in our research, interviewed now well over a couple hundred people just in research. In my clinical practice, I have people coming to me for now well over a decade because they want to share this experience that they've never shared with anyone else before, but they're afraid to share it because they feel they're going to be labeled as crazy or, a grief hallucination. And so they don't want to take that risk of tainting this beautiful experience of essentially going into the afterlife with their loved one. They don't want to mess with it.
And remind me what kind of doctor you are?
I'm a psychotherapist, marriage and family therapist.
A psychotherapist, marriage and family. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not unfamiliar with this realm of delving into the mind and discovering what's going on. Is it real? Is it not real?
Yeah.
Is there something really there? And you've come to the conclusion that there is.
Well, I've definitely come to the conclusion that there is, but I should also say that when I worked in Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco, which was an open ward, 24-bed hospice for the indigent of San Francisco. So you can imagine all sorts of people coming, like homeless people, with problems, unable, not having family to care for them. So they would essentially come to our hospice and wait to die. Well, this meant death and dying was happening all the time, all around us, which means I was as my colleagues in the hospice project, at the bedside of people dying. And I'll share one experience with you here, Dave, where I'm reading to Ron, as I was reading to him every afternoon from the same book. I still remember the book, Jack London's Call of the Wild. And he is prone on his bed, unresponsive. And as I'm reading to it, all of a sudden I pop out of my body and I look at my body from above. I can actually see me holding the book and reading the words. So it's kind of like I'm in a parallel universe. Ron is, of course, unresponsive in his bed, but there is Ron right next to me, smiling, big face. I can still see it. And he says to me, check this out. This is where I have been. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So what Ron is now out of his body, and I am sharing this out of body experience with him. And as I've learned now, these experiences happen. And then in this case, he wasn't quite ready to leave. But in most cases, it's a dying and death process, imminent or just at that time. So that's a real basic experience that I had, because most of the shared death experiences are really sharing in the journey. And that's the dominant motif, is that you actually share in the journey with the dying to a benevolent afterlife.
Before I became a Christian, I was involved in occultic type of things, astral projection and numerology, mind probe, Silva mind control, things like that. And I saw some pretty weird stuff. And we used to travel in our minds. We used to go through the colors of the rainbow, and we would get to white, which was an alpha state in our minds, very high, a series of waves. And that is when we would imagine leaving our bodies and traveling the universe, and whatever we would imagine, we were told, became real. I don't know, I don't know what category to put all that in. All I know is I experienced it, and it seemed real, and it was very interesting. I don't know, as a Christian, I don't know how to categorize that, but I know there's a lot of things we just don't understand.
Yeah. And, you're raising a good question here. And if you were to apply that to the shared death experience, is it possible that these people are making this up and then believing it? Because like you said, if they kind of dream this in some way, then they can reify it by thinking about it and ruminating about it and make it real. Well, we know that's the way memory works as well. So, but here's the thing. These experiences are happening in minds of people who have no idea that the shared death experience even exists. They reach out to me and they say, hey, I've heard that might know something about this experience I've had, or I saw you, I was Googling it and I came across to sharedcrossing.com, and you described an experience that I had, but I'm not sure. They're like timid and cautious. And then I talked to them about it, and there's a pattern that I saw. And I didn't just start doing this. I've been doing this now for about 12 years. And the pattern became very clear. It was very similar to the near-death experience. It always had a journey motif, and the bond, the relationship between the dying and the caregiver loved one was always pretty strong. And then there's a number of different types of features that we saw in it, which I could go into. But the basic idea is you're always kind of with that person, either sensing it, witnessing this phenomena, the near-death type of phenomena. You can accompany them and go along the journey, or you can guide them. Some of these people say they're brought into the journey to guide them.
Spirit and I think guides.
What's that?
Spirit guides.
Well, yeah. I'm glad you're bringing that up, because another feature, which is the most dominant feature, is in 51% of the cases that we've studied, they see the dying. They actually see the dying. And in 16%, they also see an elevated spirit being guiding, like a guardian angel of sorts. And then in 13% of the cases, they see other deceased relatives that kind of serve as the welcoming party. And so you can see how this kind of matches up with the near-death experience. But this is not a person having a personal brush with death. This is just a caregiver loved one who is close to this person dying relationally, not necessarily physically.
Interesting. Yeah, so you've learned a lot, huh?
Well, I am fascinated by this, and now I teach about it. And of course, I wrote, the first research-based book on this, At Heaven's Door. And it features 28 accounts. And I really made the point of gradually taking the reader through my experience of learning about it, and also stepping up the different types of shared death experiences. And there's one feature that I find very affirming, and that is I think it's about a quarter of the cases, maybe more, because I kind of discovered this as I was going along in the research and wasn't really looking for it until I was well into the research. There is this presence that I've called the conductor. And sometimes it's a visible being, and sometimes experiencers just say that they felt this guiding force. And, and I actually had this.
Is it a form of a death angel?
Well, it could be, but its role is that it's lovingly facilitating the transition of a spirit soul from a human body into this benevolent afterlife. And it's described differently, but it seems to be very intentional. It has sometimes an urgency to it, and it's really managing a lot. So people will say, well, this guy, this presence was waiting for this, or, kind of I could feel the energy shifting. And people, this is an ineffable realm, if you will. So people really grapple with the language, but I kind of love to liken this to some like the hands of God, so to speak, that are there, angels, guardian angels, whatever you want to call them, but that are helping us let go of our life and go to heaven.
So I have two questions. The first question is, you posed the question, why would a caregiver want to have a shared death experience? Is this something that a caregiver should seek out? And is it possible to seek out, or are they just lucky that they do, or are they unlucky if they don't?
Yeah, you're touching on the big mystery here. Is like, how does a shared death experience happen? Like, what enables or facilitates an SDE? And in our research, what we have found is that people who have prayer practices, meditation practices, seem to be more open and receptive to them, more available to have them. We also know that there's a few other things that help, and that is really being aware that these experiences can happen. So just the knowledge that this experience can happen, when it starts happening, or you start feeling a shift in the energy in the room, or a light change, or something spiritual energetically, and you go and you open to it, you don't resist it, you open to it, then that's a step in allowing it to occur. And then we also say, by way of preparation in advance, really working with your unfinished business with both the dying and the caregiver loved one. So that's the spiritual, religious cleansing, healing, reconciliation, all the work that, the amends, all that kind of stuff. And then the other piece is to remember, so I should say the Shared Crossing Project, and I teach people how to do this. We have programs and what have you, and you can go to our website if you're interested. But one of the things we teach the dying is how to stay conscious and aware during your transition, and how to know when to turn back, if you will. If you're progressing away from the planet and the earth realm, how to turn back and say to your loved ones, surviving loved ones, come to me. Here's where I am. Bring them there. And we've had a good deal of success with this.
Yeah. I hate to bring this up, but it's a little controversial, but I know people are asking, because they all come from different realms of faith, etc.
Sure.
But, we know some people out there believe all dogs and people go to heaven.
Yeah.
And you and I can both see there is evil in the world. There's dark, there's light, there's good, there's bad. And, a lot of people don't believe that all people are going to heaven. Some people are going to that other place. I'm reminded of the movie Ghost. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
They saw the light and they were going up, or they saw these black demons that were pulling them down. Yeah. I mean, do you get involved in that aspect of, I know it's very controversial and it's very divisive, but
I think it's a good question. I mean, I think this notion of heaven and hell is really imbued in our culture. It's what we grow up with as certainly a Christian, dominant Christian culture. And the history of Christianity has had, in Revelation,
Judaism.
And Judaism too. Obviously Revelation speaks to this. But I have to tell you, I and my team, we have yet to see a realm that an experiencer expresses as hellish. I will say that they have seen their dying loved one confused, overwhelmed, needing assistance, but not anything that wasn't work-outable. In other words, just they get oriented to the light, essentially, and they start progressing in a positive direction, positive being heading towards the light. Some shared death experiencers will have what we call a sympathetic SDE. And that is, I'll give you one case from Sarah. Sarah is, in Santa Barbara, and she gets up in the morning, she's feeling sweaty and hot and feverish and throws up and very uncomfortable. And her family says, we're taking you to the hospital. And they said, yeah, let's go. And then she starts feeling a little better. So she stays. She gets a call from her sister and her sister says to her, I have very sad news for you. Your niece died this morning of a drug overdose. Well, on our research team, we have Dr. Monica Williams, an ER physician, and she says the symptoms that Sarah had are identical to a drug overdose. So we have a dozen or so cases where people have a sympathetic SDE where their symptoms match those that would have been the dying symptoms, drug overdoses, a lot of cardiac cases we have. I think we have a number of those where they feel pressure in their chest, trouble breathing, they fall over, and so
I'm sure it's even stronger in twins, two people who shared the womb.
Absolutely, yeah. And unfortunately, Dave, we don't have any twins in our study, but man, I would love to find that.
Well, it's very interesting, and of course, we don't have all the answers, do we? These are just theories and testimonials and a bunch of testimonials that agree with each other. So you come up with an interesting concept of caregivers who have this connection with their loved one, especially an elderly one who might be close to death, might be in hospice.
Yes.
And you're encouraging them that they should seek this out, learn more about it. And because it's, you've heard so many stories about it that it would probably be a good thing. And let me just digress one moment, something you said before, if I can remember it. I've heard stories. Everyone's writing a book about a near-death experience. And I remember one or two where it was hellish for this person. Mm-hmm. And he was graciously granted to go back and change his evil ways. Have you heard anything like that, where they got a second chance?
We haven't, no.
Okay.
But I do know that in the near-death experiences, yes, people have the opportunity to come back and live differently.
Okay. Yeah. And what about the first thing that I mentioned about caregivers seeking this out?
So, I think the first thing I would suggest to your, large audience of caregivers, presumably, is to get familiar with this experience. And one way to do that would be you just, go to sharecrossing.com, which is my website. You can read about it all free. And then you can also see videos of shared death experiencers sharing their stories and their videos from our research, ordinary people, that just stumbled upon this experience. And you'll see in the way they describe it that they didn't have any idea what this was, but it was so healing for them. What makes the shared death experience so powerful, and really why I, as a therapist, am so interested in it, is it really helps the grief and bereavement process. It helps people understand that their loved one is alive and well in a benevolent afterlife, that death is not to be feared, and that their grief is greatly, as we say, enhanced in a certain way. It's imbued with meaning. So,
yeah, and we talk about, good people versus people who are evil. There aren't too many evil caregivers. I mean, if you're going to be a caregiver, you're a pretty darn good person. You're sacrificial and you're giving up, your own life to make the life better for another. So maybe that's another reason why you don't hear about the other side, so to speak.
Well, I would think, certainly for professional caregivers. In fact, I have been, invited frequently to speak at different senior communities, memory care facilities, because their caregivers want to know about this experience, and they work so closely, especially during COVID. The amount of inquiries I got was huge because they're taking the role of family members while people were at the end of life. And
they couldn't come.
They couldn't come. Yeah. And so I've gotten so many requests to talk and review my book. So I will tell you an easy way, if you're interested, is, the book is At Heaven's Door, and it's got 28 stories. It talks about why I think these experiences happen, and they're very moving. It's a great resource for caregivers because the experience is so positive.
Yeah, it's a great book for February, since there's 28 days in February.
That's right.
So we're running out of time. What haven't I asked you that you would like to mention before we leave?
No, you've been so direct in your questions. I appreciate it. I mean, all I would say, is just that as caregivers, know that this is possible, because I think a lot of your caregivers, since they're, especially if they've had multiple experiences close to the dying, I'll bet a lot of your caregivers have had something like this. If not, also to say is that we still collect stories. We're still doing the research, and we also collect end-of-life experiences. So that would be post-death visions and visitations, and pre-death visions and visitations. All that we're very interested in, because we all see this points to this thinning of the veil and this lovely, affirming connection across this veil between human life and what lies beyond.
So have you been responsible in putting certain stories in medical journals, and how has the mainstream and scientific and medical community reacted to such stories?
Great. Yeah. So my organization, the Shared Crossing Research Initiative, just published the first article in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. This is a major top tier medical journal, and the reviewers were thrilled.
How hard was it to get in there?
Well, not that hard, because I think our research is really good. I mean, we've got a multidisciplinary team. Dr. Michael Kinsella is our chief of research. He's a religious studies, and like I said, Dr. Monica Williams, ER physician, and me as a psychotherapist. We really covered every question they might have. But what they said was so interesting. They said, one reviewer said, "I know these experiences happen. We all know they happen. We hear about them. But thank you for doing the first robust study. This is a true contribution to the end of life literature." Now, I should say, Dave, we also just were published in Omega, Journal of Death and Dying, as a feature article on this and other end of life experiences that we've identified. And
this ain't your first rodeo, huh?
Yeah. I mean, we are just getting started. So imagine this: we had the two really huge research articles in top tier journals, and then the public audience book At Heaven's Door all came out within a month and a half. Yeah. So this is a good time, and like I said, I'm really.
Where are you based? Where are you located?
Santa Barbara, California.
Okay, you're on the West Coast like me.
Yeah.
Did we meet in New York? How did we connect? Through your publicist?
Yeah, my publicist. Yeah.
Great. So you're getting a lot of publicity these days.
I feel just so thankful that you and others are interested.
It's an interesting topic, and everyone seems to be talking about it.
Yeah, it is. And there's so much kind of bad news about death. This is the best news about death that I've ever come across. And
unfortunately, a lot of bad stories about suicide, people who are rushing death,
Yeah. Yeah. Those are very undesirable end of life situations.
Permanent problem to a temporary permanent solution to a temporary problem. There you go.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah. We need better education on depression and, the things we can do about it, that it is temporary, that, oh boy, that's another show, isn't it?
That's another show.
At caregiverdave.com. It's a free membership support community. Lots of tools, resources, free gifts, as well as a Facebook page with the same name. And please click on the like button below, whatever platform you're watching or listening to this interview on. It helps us reach even more caregivers by improving Google's search engine. So again, thank you to all my listeners out there all over the world. Thank you for tuning in twice each and every Wednesday and making us the #1 caregiver podcast on the internet. And one more time, how do we get a hold of you, Doctor?
Go to sharedcrossing.com.
Okay. And until next week, same time, same channel, may God richly bless you. Bye-bye.
Our featured speaker is a best-selling author who has written numerous books and articles. He's a speaker, life coach, and host of Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver radio program. He frequently appears on television and radio shows all across the country and has even shared the stage with Suzanne Summers at Harvard. But his most important role is caregiver to his beautiful wife, Charlene, for over 22 years. Please welcome Mr. Dave Nasani!
I want to share with you a love story. In a couple of weeks, my wife and I will be celebrating 44 years of being together. My wife, Charlene, and I had a fairy tale, storybook, romance, courtship, and marriage for the first 21 years of our lives together. One day, out of nowhere, my wife has a headache, the headache of her life. She suffered a massive stroke, and it left her severely speech impaired and paralyzed on the right side. And in that moment, our world turned upside down. I gotta tell you, the next 2 years was like a living hell. I just didn't know what to do. I felt guilty most of the time. I became a caregiver. I didn't even know what a caregiver was. I was experiencing the same problems that other caregivers experience. If you don't take care of you, I can't take care of her. Well, that's why I wrote the book. Now I can teach other caregivers. I'm living proof that you can thrive as a caregiver. My wife and I travel now all over the world sharing our story. One day, life is gonna call upon you to be the captain of your boat. Heck, you might be saving your own life. Thank you.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.